Raymond Walsh's fingers traced the edge of the job posting, the paper worn smooth from nervous hands before his. Around him, the waiting room buzzed with warnings disguised as concern. "Brother, think twice," a man whispered, eyes darting toward the closed office door. "Patricia Hartwell isn't just tough, she's impossible." The position seemed straightforward enough. Private driver for a billionaire CEO. But scrawled in faded ink at the bottom was a number that made his stomach turn. 20 drivers terminated in 6 months. 20 professionals who'd entered with pressed suits and left with shattered confidence. An elderly security guard leaned against the wall, shaking his head slowly. "She doesn't yell. Doesn't have to. 3 weeks is the record. Most crack in 10 days. Raymond's wallet contained 12 crumpled dollars. A grocery receipt, and a school photo of Owen, his 8-year-old son with gap-toothed smile and trusting eyes. The eviction notice burned in his jacket pocket, dated for next Friday. Through the window, he watched others hurry past the building, warned away by reputation alone. Every instinct screamed to join them. What Raymond couldn't possibly know, what would only reveal itself in the brutal months ahead, was that this job everyone fled from would become the most transformative decision of his life. The apartment smelled of instant noodles and broken promises. Raymond sat at the kitchen table, the job application spread before him like a confession. 4 months of unemployment had stripped away everything except the essentials, a roof that wouldn't be theirs much longer, and Owen's laughter that somehow persisted despite it all. The boy was in the next room, homework scattered across the worn carpet, humming a tune Raymond recognized from school. He'd applied to 47 positions in 3 months. Each one met with the same polite rejection. What they meant, Raymond knew, was that a 39-year-old man with a high school diploma and a 4-year gap in his resume wasn't worth the risk. The Hartwell Holdings application felt different in his hands, heavier somehow, as if the weight of those 20 failed predecessors had soaked into the paper itself. Patricia Hartwell, founder and CEO of a tech empire worth billions, was legendary for her brilliance and infamous for her brutality. The driver position had been posted for 6 weeks, an eternity in a job market where positions vanished within hours. Owen appeared in the doorway, clutching a math worksheet. "Dad, can you check number 7? Raymond pulled his son close, breathing in the scent of cheap shampoo and childhood. The boy's sneakers were developing holes that would need covering with cardboard soon. These were the details that haunted Raymond, the visible proof of his struggle, worn like badges on his child's body. Owen's face brightened with understanding when Raymond explained the equation, and Raymond felt the familiar ache of inadequacy mixed with fierce love. This boy deserved so much more. That night, after Owen fell asleep, Raymond filled out the application. At the bottom, in the section marked, "Why are you interested in this position?" he wrote only the truth. "I need this job." No embellishment, no false enthusiasm, just the raw arithmetic of desperation. The call came 3 days later, offering him an interview. Raymond owned one good shirt, pressed so many times the collar had gone thin, one pair of dress pants that still fit if he cinched the belt tight enough, one chance that nobody else wanted. The building rose like a glass monument to everything Raymond wasn't. In the waiting room, other applicants left one by one, a man muttering about impossible standards, a woman with tears in her eyes saying, "She's not human." Raymond's turn came as afternoon light slanted through the windows. The office was all sharp edges and cold surfaces. Patricia Hartwell stood by the window, silhouetted against the cityscape. She didn't turn until he'd been standing there long enough to feel awkward. When she finally faced him, Raymond understood immediately why 20 men had failed. Her eyes held no warmth, only assessment, the kind that saw through pretense straight to inadequacy. "Mr. Walsh," her voice matched her appearance, controlled, exact. "You're late." Raymond's watch showed 2:58. The appointment was for 3. "I'm 2 minutes early, ma'am." Patricia's expression didn't change. "If you're not early, you're late. First lesson. Sit." The interview bore no resemblance to any he'd experienced. Patricia recited requirements that grew more exacting with each point. Car temperature exactly 71 degrees. Rotes memorized daily by 6 in the morning. Silence, unless she initiated conversation. The list went on. 47 rules delivered in that same flat tone, each one a small impossibility stacked on top of others. "Most people quit after the first week," Patricia said, watching him like a scientist observing bacteria. "The record is 23 days. You have a son." It wasn't a question. Raymond stiffened. "Yes, ma'am." Her gaze sharpened. "Single father." Heat crawled up Raymond's neck. "Yes, ma'am." She nodded. "Children are distractions. Personal problems are distractions. I don't tolerate distractions. If you accept this position, your life outside these hours doesn't exist. Understood?" Every fiber of Raymond's being wanted to stand up and leave. But Owen's face swam before his eyes, gap-toothed smile, trusting eyes, shoes with holes. "Understood," he said, and felt something inside him break and harden simultaneously. Patricia studied him for another long moment. "You start Monday, 6 in the morning. Don't be late." Raymond walked out feeling like he'd just signed away more than his time. He'd gotten the job nobody wanted. Stepped into the role that had destroyed 20 men before him. As he rode the bus home, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made either the biggest mistake or the most important decision of his life. That weekend, Raymond prepared like a soldier heading to war. He studied maps until he could navigate anywhere without hesitation. He researched Patricia Hartwell, her company, her reputation, her rare public appearances, where she stood apart from everyone else. Owen watched these preparations with quiet concern. "Is your new boss mean?" Raymond paused, the iron hissing in his hand. "She's just very particular," he finally said. Owen nodded. "You'll do good, Dad. You always make things right." Monday morning arrived with cruel brightness. Raymond stood outside the Hartwell Holdings garage at 5:45, heart pounding. The black Mercedes gleamed under fluorescent lights. A maintenance worker handed him the keys with pity in his eyes. "Good luck, man." He set the temperature to 71 degrees, checked it 3 times. At 5:58, his phone buzzed. "Ms. Hartwell will be down in 90 seconds. Engine running. Passenger door side street entrance." Raymond's hands shook as he maneuvered to position. Patricia emerged exactly on time, heels clicking like gunshots. She was already reaching for the handle before Raymond could open her door. She slid into the back seat without acknowledgement, phone already in hand. Raymond closed the door and returned to the driver's seat, his shirt already damp with nervous sweat. "The Meridian Tower," Patricia said, expecting him to already know this. Raymond did know. He'd memorized her typical Monday route. But her tone suggested knowledge wasn't enough. 2 blocks later, her voice cut through the silence. "Temperature is 72 degrees." Raymond's stomach dropped. "Yes, ma'am. Adjusting now." The correction earned no response, just the continued tapping of her fingers on her phone. The morning continued in this vein. Small failures that Patricia noted with surgical precision. He'd taken the correct route, but failed to anticipate construction. He'd opened her door, but stood too close. By the time he dropped her off, Raymond's jaw ached from clenching. "Tomorrow, 6 in the morning," Patricia said without looking at him. "Don't be late." The days blurred into a gauntlet of microscopic failures. Patricia found fault in everything. His posture, the fraction of a second delay in responses, the barely perceptible hesitation before turns. She never raised her voice. She simply noted each deficiency in that flat tone, cataloging his inadequacies like a ledger of debt. At home, Raymond collapsed each night too exhausted to eat, while Owen would curl up beside him asking if Dad's job was getting better. "Sure, buddy," Raymond would lie, "getting easier every day." 2 weeks in, Raymond seriously considered quitting. The thought arrived during a particularly brutal morning when Patricia had criticized his route choice, despite it being the one she'd specified the previous day. "Initiative, Mr. Walsh," she'd said, her tone arctic. "I employ drivers who think, not robots who follow instructions." The contradiction was dizzying. Be obedient but independent. Follow rules, but show initiative. It was a maze with no exit. That evening, Raymond sat at the kitchen table with classified ads spread before him, circling warehouse positions, delivery jobs. Owen did his homework nearby, unusually quiet. Finally, the boy spoke. "Dad, are you going to quit?" The question hung heavy. Raymond looked at his son, at the determination in that small face, and something inside him shifted. "No," he heard himself say. "No, I'm not." Because quitting was exactly what Patricia expected. 20 men had given her that satisfaction. Raymond decided he wouldn't be the 21st. Not because he thought he could meet her standards, but because giving up meant proving her right about his unworthiness. And that was something he refused to do. The next morning, he arrived at 5:30 instead of 5:45. He spent the extra time observing, learning, anticipating. He noticed Patricia was left-handed, so he positioned himself accordingly when opening doors. He noticed she tensed when he spoke before 9 in the morning, so he stopped speaking before 9 unless necessary. He began tracking patterns too subtle to name but clear enough to follow. Patricia noticed. The criticisms continued, but something had shifted. Now, when she pointed out a flaw, Raymond thanked her and moved forward without visible distress. He'd stopped trying to be perfect and started trying to be useful. Instead of seeing each criticism as failure, he reframed them as data. And slowly, painfully, he began to map the machinery of her expectations. 3 weeks passed, then 4. The maintenance staff started looking at Raymond differently, surprise replacing pity. He was approaching the record. Raymond felt it too. Not as pride, but as grim determination. The corrections were becoming more specific, less broadly dismissive. And occasionally, she would use his name instead of just driver. But the job was costing him in other ways. Owen spent increasing time alone. Raymond missed dinners, bedtime stories, the small rituals that had defined their relationship. He saw the toll in Owen's eyes, in the way the boy had stopped expecting consistency. One evening in the 5th week, Owen's school called. The boy had gotten into a fight, unusual for his gentle nature. Raymond had to ask Patricia to leave early for a family emergency. The silence that followed stretched unbearably. Then Patricia spoke. "Handle it. But you'll make up the hours tomorrow." At the school, Owen sat in the principal's office, knuckles scraped, eyes blazing with unshed tears. The fight had started when another boy mocked Owen's shoes, the ones with holes. "I'm tired of people looking down on us, Dad," Owen said in the car, his voice cracking. Raymond pulled over and wrapped his son in his arms. "We're not poor," Raymond whispered. "We're fighters, and fighters don't quit." But that night, unable to sleep, Raymond confronted the question. Was this worth it? Owen needed a father, not a ghost. He was disappearing into this role, losing pieces of himself. The thought of quitting returned, dressed up as concern for his son. Morning arrived. Raymond moved through preparations mechanically, his decision unmade. At 6 sharp, Patricia emerged, but today something was different. She walked slower, her posture less rigid. When she settled into the back seat, Raymond caught a glimpse of her face in the mirror. Pale, drawn, touched with something that almost looked like pain. "The office," she said, her voice lacking its typical precision. They were 3 blocks from the tower when Patricia's phone slipped from her hand. She bent to retrieve it and went still. Raymond glanced back. Her face had gone gray. "Miss Hartwell?" No response. Her breathing had become shallow, rapid. Without thinking, Raymond turned the car toward Mercy Hospital. Patricia tried to protest, her words fragmented. "Meeting. Important." But her objection faded into silence. The emergency room erupted when Raymond carried Patricia through the doors. Nurses descended. A gurney appeared. Patricia's protests became weaker before stopping. Raymond stood in the suddenly quiet waiting area, heart hammering. He'd ignored a direct order, made an executive decision without consent. Patricia would almost certainly fire him for this. Hours passed. A nurse asked about next of kin. Raymond had nothing. Patricia's purse was in the car, and after 5 weeks, he knew virtually nothing about her personal life. "You're all she's got right now," the nurse said. "You should probably stay." So he stayed, calling Owen to explain, calling Patricia's assistant to cancel meetings. When the doctor finally appeared, her expression was neutral. "She has a bleeding ulcer, stress-induced. She needs to rest. Actually rest. She'll be held overnight." Raymond nodded, trying to reconcile the invincible Patricia Hartwell with human vulnerability. He should have left then. But something kept him in that chair. Around 7, a nurse told him Patricia was awake and asking for him. Raymond followed her to a private room where Patricia lay in a hospital bed, looking smaller somehow. IVs ran into her arm. Her eyes, when they focused on Raymond, held surprise that someone had stayed. "You disobeyed a direct order," Patricia said, her voice rough. Raymond stood near the door. "Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry." Patricia studied him. "I could fire you for that." Raymond nodded. "Yes, ma'am, I know." Silence. Then, "Why did you stay?" The question caught him off guard. He told the truth. Because everyone needs somebody, even if they don't think they do. Something passed across Patricia's face, too quick to read. She looked away, toward the window. "There's a boy outside," she said finally, "in the waiting room." Raymond's stomach clenched. "Owen." "That's my son," Raymond admitted. "I'm sorry. I can have someone pick him up," but Patricia cut him off. "Bring him in." Raymond found Owen in the waiting area, small and worried. "Is your boss okay?" Owen asked. Raymond knelt. "She's okay now, and she wants to meet you." Owen's eyes widened. "Really?" Raymond took his son's hand, noticing again the worn clothes, the scuffed shoes. Patricia's expression when they entered was unreadable. She looked at Owen with analytical focus. But Owen simply stepped forward and said, "I'm Owen. I'm glad you're feeling better. My dad has been really worried about you." The honesty seemed to catch Patricia off guard. "Has he?" Owen nodded. "He worries about everyone. That's just how he is." Patricia's gaze shifted to Raymond, something new entering her eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Seeing him for the first time as a complete person. "What grade are you in, Owen?" she asked, her voice softer than Raymond had ever heard. Owen launched into explaining his solar system project. Patricia listened, actually listened, asking genuine questions. When Owen mentioned wanting to be an engineer, Patricia's lips curved into almost a smile. "Your father has those qualities. You probably do too." The compliment landed like a stone in still water. Raymond stared at Patricia, searching for sarcasm, finding none. She met his gaze steadily. An unspoken acknowledgement passed between them, of the brutal weeks, the impossible standards, but also the fact that Raymond had survived. He'd stayed when everyone ran. He'd prioritized her well-being over his job security, and he'd raised a son who could offer kindness without fear. A nurse arrived, suggesting visitors leave. Owen waved goodbye. Raymond lingered at the door. "Mr. Walsh," Patricia said, and he turned. Her expression had shifted, more guarded, but traces of softness remained. "Thank you. For today." The words were simple, but from Patricia Hartwell, they felt monumental. Raymond nodded and ushered Owen out. The next morning, Raymond arrived uncertain what to expect. Patricia's assistant had messaged that Ms. Hartwell would rest today. Around noon, his phone rang. Patricia's voice, still rough. "Tomorrow, 6 in the morning. The office. I'm not an invalid." Raymond almost laughed at her stubborn determination. "Yes, ma'am, I'll be ready." A pause. "And Walsh? Your son. He needs better shoes." The observation felt like something else, like being seen. "We manage," Raymond said quietly. Another pause. "I'm sure you do." 6 in the morning. Walsh? Patricia returned to work 2 days later with her usual schedule and standards. But Raymond noticed changes, subtle as hairline cracks. She still corrected mistakes, still demanded perfection, but now she occasionally explained the reasoning. When he anticipated her needs correctly, she acknowledged it with a brief, "Good." Once, when he braked suddenly to avoid a pedestrian, she said, "Well handled," instead of criticizing the disruption. More significantly, Patricia began asking questions. About Owen. How was school? Had the boy finished his project? Was he still interested in engineering? Raymond answered carefully at first, but gradually relaxed. He learned that Patricia had built her company from nothing, that she'd faced prejudice at every turn, that her armor had been forged in battles Raymond could only imagine. One morning, about 2 weeks after the hospital, Patricia did something unprecedented. She invited Raymond to her office after dropping her off. He followed her into the executive suite where everything gleamed. She gestured to a chair, the first time she'd asked him to sit in her presence. "I'm creating a new position," she said without preamble. Executive assistant. Someone detail-oriented, reliable, capable of anticipating needs. Someone I can trust. She paused, her eyes meeting his. "I want you to consider it." Raymond's mind went blank. Executive assistant. A position beyond anything he'd imagined. "Ms. Hartwell, I don't have the education, the experience." Patricia cut him off. "You have something more valuable. Integrity. You've proven you can handle impossible standards." A ghost of humor touched her expression. "I should know. I set them deliberately high." Raymond understood then. The impossible demands, the 20 failed predecessors. It had all been a test of character, of perseverance. "I've spent years," Patricia continued, "keeping people at a distance, testing them until they break. You're the first person who didn't break, the first who saw past the tests to the person administering them." She turned toward the window. "Your son reminded me that kindness isn't weakness, and you showed me that strength doesn't require hardness. Those are lessons I'd forgotten." The offer came with substantial increase in salary, benefits, and regular hours. There would be training, courses Patricia would sponsor. The work would still be demanding. Patricia hadn't become easy, but focused on growth rather than endurance. "Why me?" Raymond asked. "Really?" "Why?" Patricia turned back. "Because when I was vulnerable, you didn't take advantage. You stayed. And you brought your son, who looked at me like I was just a person who needed kindness. I haven't been seen as just a person in a very long time." Raymond took the position. The transition wasn't smooth. Patricia's standards remained exacting. But she was true to her word about training. She enrolled Raymond in business courses, connected him with mentors. Gradually, Raymond discovered he had talent for this work. Skills developed through single parenthood, juggling limited resources, reading unspoken needs, planning ahead, translated surprisingly well to the executive suite. Owen's life transformed too. Patricia arranged a scholarship to a private school with an excellent engineering program. "It's an investment in talent," she said, dismissing protests about charity. Owen gained confidence from seeing his father succeed, from understanding circumstances, could change through persistence and dignity. And Raymond gained what he'd thought lost: time with his son, evenings and weekends, the ability to be present for the small moments that built a childhood. 6 months into his new role, Raymond sat in Patricia's office, reviewing quarterly reports, comfortable now in this space. When Patricia disconnected from a call, she glanced at him with approval. "The Anderson deal. Your analysis was correct." Raymond tried not to show his pride. These acknowledgments from Patricia meant more than effusive praise from anyone else. "I fired 3 people today," Patricia said abruptly. Raymond looked up, concerned. They were mocking a junior analyst for his background, immigrant family, working through night school. She met Raymond's eyes. "I won't tolerate that anymore. Not in my company." Raymond understood. She'd learned this from him, from Owen, from the hospital room conversation about kindness. The company culture slowly shifted. Patricia was still demanding, but the fear began to dissipate. People stayed longer, offered innovative ideas instead of just surviving. And at the center was the unlikely partnership between a billionaire CEO who'd learned to be human and a single father who'd taught her how. A year after Raymond had stood in that waiting room, terrified and desperate, he stood in the same building in completely different circumstances. The company hosted a gala celebrating a major acquisition. Raymond attended as Patricia's assistant, managing the evening's logistics. Owen was there too, at Patricia's insistence, wearing a new suit. "Future engineer," she'd said. "Needs to look the part." Raymond watched his son navigate the crowd with confidence, chatting with executives. This was a world Raymond had never imagined Owen could access. He caught Patricia's eye across the room, and she gave him the smallest nod, her version of approval, of something that might be called friendship. Later that evening, after the crowds dispersed, Raymond found himself alone with Patricia in her office, reviewing outcomes. The city stretched below them, lights glittering, the same view that had intimidated Raymond so completely a year ago. "You should get home," Patricia said, closing her laptop. "Owen's probably exhausted." Raymond nodded, but didn't move immediately. There was something he needed to say. "Thank you," he finally managed. "For taking a chance on me. For seeing something I didn't see in myself." Patricia looked at him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "I didn't give you anything, Walsh. You earned every bit of this. The job, the promotion, the opportunities. You earned them by refusing to quit when quitting would have been easier." She paused, her voice softening. "I was wrong to test people that way. You taught me that." Raymond shook his head. "You gave me a chance when everyone else saw me as a risk." Patricia's lips curved slightly. "Everyone else was a fool then. Though I'll admit I almost joined them. You were minutes away from being fired at least 5 times in those first few weeks." Raymond laughed, the tension breaking. "Only 5 times. I counted at least 10. As Raymond prepared to leave, Patricia spoke again. "That job posting. The driver position. I've left it open." Raymond turned, confused. "You're hiring another driver?" Patricia shook her head. "I'm keeping it posted as a reminder. 20 people ran from it. You didn't. That means there are others out there, people who've been overlooked, told they're not enough, who just need someone to take a chance on them. I want to find those people now." Raymond understood then the full transformation. Patricia hadn't just changed how she treated him, she'd changed how she saw potential itself. "The posting gets applications every week," Patricia continued. "People desperate enough to try. I interview them all now, really interview them. Some of them are working here now. Good people doing good work." The weight of this revelation settled over Raymond. That terrible job had become a pathway for others. His survival had rewritten the rules. "I never knew," Raymond said quietly. Patricia nodded. You weren't supposed to. But you should know now. What you did. Refusing to quit. Maintaining kindness in the face of cruelty. Showing up for your son even when exhausted. It rippled outward. Changed more than just your circumstances. Raymond thought about that terrified man from a year ago, standing in the waiting room, everyone warning him away. He thought about the 20 people who'd quit before him, each one probably with good reasons, valid reasons. He'd been no braver than them, no more capable. He'd just been desperate enough to stay past the breaking point, and lucky enough that his staying had coincided with Patricia's moment of vulnerability. Timing and desperation, such small things to build transformation on. And yet here they stood. Two people who'd found unexpected salvation in each other's extremity. The following months continued to unfold with the steady rhythm of sustainable success rather than desperate survival. Raymond grew into his role, his confidence building with each challenge mastered. Patricia continued her demanding ways, but tempered now with the kind of mentorship that built people up rather than testing them to destruction. And Owen thrived, his natural brilliance given room to flourish, his kindness remaining intact despite the new privileges surrounding him. On the anniversary of Raymond's hiring, Patricia did something unprecedented. She called an all-company meeting, standing before hundreds of employees in the main atrium. Raymond sat in the front row, puzzled by the mysterious summons, by the unusual format. Patricia wasn't one for grand gestures or emotional declarations. She built her empire through precision and strategy, not sentiment. So when she began speaking about second chances, about looking beyond credentials to character, about the importance of perseverance, Raymond felt increasingly uncomfortable with where this might be headed. A year ago, Patricia said, her voice carrying through the space with its usual clarity. I was a different person running a different company. I believed in impossible standards and inevitable failure. I tested people until they broke because I was convinced everyone would break eventually. And then someone didn't break. Her eyes found Raymond in the crowd. Raymond Walsh applied for a position that had defeated 20 people before him. He had every reason to quit. I gave him those reasons daily. But he stayed. And in staying, he changed not just his own trajectory, but this entire organization's culture. Raymond felt heat rise in his face as hundreds of eyes turned toward him. This was mortifying. Patricia never acknowledged personal matters publicly, never showed sentiment. What was she doing? But Patricia continued, and gradually, Raymond understood this wasn't about embarrassing him. It was about sending a message to everyone present. I'm announcing a new initiative today, Patricia said. The Second Chance program. We'll be actively recruiting candidates who've been overlooked by traditional hiring. Single parents, people with employment gaps, those with potential but not pedigree. Mr. Walsh will be heading this initiative. The announcement landed like a thunderclap. Raymond's mouth fell open. Heading an initiative? This was the first he'd heard of it. Patricia's lips curved into that almost smile, clearly enjoying his shock. He'll have budget, authority, and my full support. Because if we can find more people like Raymond Walsh, people with integrity, perseverance, and humanity, this company will be unstoppable. The applause started slowly, then built to something overwhelming. Raymond sat frozen, his mind racing. This was beyond anything he'd imagined, a responsibility vast and terrifying and perfect. After the meeting, as employees filtered out with excited chatter about the new program, Raymond cornered Patricia in her office. You could have warned me, he said, trying for stern and landing somewhere near bewildered. Patricia shrugged, unbothered. You would have protested, claimed you weren't qualified, made excuses. This way. It's already announced. You're committed. Raymond couldn't argue with that logic. I don't know how to run a recruitment initiative. Patricia fixed him with that analytical gaze. You know how to see value where others don't. You know what it's like to need a chance and not get one. That's all the qualification required. The rest, we'll figure out together. The Second Chance program launched 3 months later, and the applications flooded in. Hundreds of people with gaps in their resumes and hope in their stories. Raymond interviewed them all, or as many as he could manage. He looked for what Patricia had seen in him, not polish or credentials, but core qualities of character. Persistence, integrity, the ability to maintain humanity under pressure. He hired a formerly incarcerated man with brilliant logistics insights. A woman who'd spent 5 years caring for a dying parent and had 0 recent work experience, but could organize chaos into efficiency. A teenage parent who dropped out of college, but had a gift for seeing market patterns. Not every hire worked out. Some couldn't adjust to Patricia's still demanding standards. Some discovered corporate life wasn't for them. But enough succeeded, thrived even, that the program became a cornerstone of the company's identity. Articles were written about Hartwell Holdings' innovative approach to recruitment. Other companies tried to copy the model with varying success. And through it all, Raymond and Patricia continued their unlikely partnership, her precision balanced by his empathy, his uncertainty steadied by her confidence. Owen grew alongside these changes. Now, a confident young man comfortable in spaces that would have intimidated his younger self. He still remembered those hard years, the eviction notices, the cardboard in his shoes, his father's exhaustion. But he understood them now as the foundation, rather than the definition of who they were. For his 13th birthday, Patricia gave Owen an internship in the engineering department, carefully structured to be educational rather than nepotistic. "You'll work harder than anyone else," she told the boy seriously, "because you're Raymond Walsh's son, and that means something in this company." The comment, meant as compliment, made Raymond's eyes sting. To have his name mean something positive, to have his perseverance become a standard rather than a struggle. This was success beyond anything he'd imagined in that desperate waiting room years ago. He thought often about those 20 men who'd quit before him, wondered what had become of them, hoped they'd found their own versions of breakthrough. Because he understood now that his success wasn't about being better than them. It was about timing, circumstance, and the random collision of his desperation with Patricia's moment of vulnerability. Any one of them might have been him, if conditions had aligned differently. 5 years after Raymond took the job nobody wanted, Hartwell Holdings had transformed into something unprecedented, a Fortune 500 company known as much for its innovative social programs as its technological achievements. The Second Chance program had expanded beyond recruitment into mentorship, education funding, and community partnerships. Patricia, once famous for her ruthless leadership style, now spoke at conferences about human-centered management and the business case for compassion. The transformation was profound enough that business schools studied it, trying to understand how such fundamental change had occurred. At the center of it all remained the partnership between Patricia and Raymond, different as night and day, but complementary in ways neither had anticipated. She provided vision and resources. He provided humanity and perspective. She pushed for excellence. He ensured excellence didn't come at the cost of dignity. Together, they'd built something that transcended either of their individual capabilities. And Owen, now 17 and preparing for engineering school, understood that his future had been purchased not with luck, but with his father's refusal to quit when quitting would have been easier. The story could end there, with neat resolution and satisfied success. But life isn't that simple, and neither was Raymond's journey. The truth was messier, more complex. There were still hard days when Patricia's demanding nature clashed with Raymond's more patient approach. Still moments when Raymond doubted himself, wondered if he truly belonged in these rarefied spaces. Still challenges as the company grew and the programs expanded beyond their initial scope. Success didn't erase struggle. It just changed the nature of what you struggled with. But on his worst days, Raymond would think back to that waiting room, to the terror and desperation, to the voice that said this job would destroy him. He'd think about the choice he'd made, to stay when everyone ran, to persist when persistence seemed pointless, to bet everything on the possibility that impossible could become possible. And he'd realize that the job hadn't destroyed him. It had revealed him, had shown him capabilities he'd never known he possessed, had connected him to opportunities he'd never imagined existed. The job nobody wanted had become exactly what everyone needed, a doorway between two worlds that rarely connected. Patricia needed someone who saw her humanity beneath the armor. Raymond needed someone who could see his potential beyond his circumstances. And somehow, against all odds and expectations, they'd found each other at exactly the right moment. That was the real magic, Raymond understood now. Not that he'd survived Patricia's impossible standards, but that her impossible standards had cracked just enough, just when he needed them to let him through. Years later, when people asked Raymond about his success, and they did ask, especially candidates in the Second Chance program who saw him as proof that transformation was possible, he always told them the truth. It wasn't a fairy tale. Patricia hadn't suddenly become kind, and he hadn't suddenly become confident. They'd both just been desperate enough to try something different, and lucky enough that their different desperations aligned. Take the job nobody wants, he'd tell them, not because it will definitely work out, but because sometimes the doors everyone runs from are the ones that lead somewhere worth going. And in her own way, Patricia echoed this message. In interviews and keynote speeches, she spoke candidly about her previous leadership style, about the 20 people she'd broken before Raymond, about the wake-up call that had forced her to question everything. I thought I was testing for strength, she'd say, but I was really just protecting myself from connection. Raymond Walsh didn't pass my tests. He endured them long enough for me to realize the tests were wrong. It was the closest Patricia Hartwell came to public vulnerability, and it resonated precisely because it cost her something to admit. The full circle moment came 7 years after that first desperate day. The driver position, still posted, still serving as both beacon and reminder, attracted an applicant who reminded Raymond eerily of his younger self. Single mother this time, 3 kids. Desperate enough to try for a job with a terrifying reputation. Raymond interviewed her himself, remembering how it felt to sit on the other side of that evaluation. He asked her about her children, her struggles, her reasons for applying despite the warnings. And he saw in her eyes the same determination he'd carried. Not confidence, but commitment. The decision to stay standing even when falling would be easier. Raymond hired her, of course. Not as Patricia's driver. Patricia had long since stopped needing a driver in the traditional sense, and Raymond's role had evolved far beyond those original parameters. But as part of the Second Chance program's newest initiative, providing pathways specifically for single parents navigating impossible circumstances. The woman's name was Teresa, and she had 3 daughters, who reminded Raymond of Owen at that age, hopeful despite everything, trusting in a future their present circumstances didn't support. Watching Teresa begin her journey, Raymond felt the weight of full circle. He'd been given a chance. He was now creating chances. The pattern repeated, expanded, became something larger than any individual story. And that, he realized, was the point. His success mattered not because it elevated him, but because it created pathways for others. The job nobody wanted had become a job everybody needed. A test, not of how much you could endure, but of whether the system could learn to value perseverance over pedigree. Patricia understood this too, in her own way. She'd built an empire before Raymond, had achieved success by any traditional measure. But the empire she built after, the one that valued character alongside competence, that created space for people like Raymond and Teresa and hundreds of others, this was the legacy she'd actually wanted, even if she hadn't known it until Raymond showed her. "You broke me of my bad habits," she told him once, during one of their rare unguarded moments. "And I gave you the platform to become who you already were. That's a fair trade, I think." Raymond couldn't disagree. The terrified man from the waiting room felt like a different person now, someone viewed from a great distance. But he wasn't, really. He was the same person, given different circumstances, different chances, different support. The core hadn't changed. The determination, the integrity, the capacity for kindness under pressure. Those qualities had always been there. They just needed someone to see them, to value them, to create space for them to flourish. On the 10-year anniversary of his hiring, the company threw a celebration that Raymond tried and failed to prevent. Owen, now in graduate school for engineering, came home for the event. Patricia gave a speech that somehow managed to be both brutally honest about her previous failures and genuinely warm about Raymond's impact. Colleagues shared stories about how the Second Chance program had changed their lives. Teresa, now a team leader herself, spoke about arriving desperate and leaving empowered. The evening felt surreal. Too much recognition, too much focus on what Raymond still thought of as just doing what needed to be done. But afterward, in the quiet of Patricia's office where this story had really begun, just the two of them and the city lights below, Raymond allowed himself to feel the full weight of what they'd built. A company that valued people, programs that created pathways. Hundreds of lives changed because he'd been too stubborn to quit, and Patricia had been vulnerable enough to learn. It was imperfect. All human systems were imperfect. But it was real. And it had started with a job nobody wanted, a decision everyone questioned, and two people desperate enough to try something different. "Would you do it again?" Patricia asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "Knowing what you know now, would you still take that job?" Raymond thought about this seriously. Would he choose to endure those brutal early weeks, the constant criticism, the grinding pressure? Would he willingly put himself through that particular hell? "Yes," he said finally, because it wasn't just about the job. It was about proving something. To you, to myself, to Owen. That circumstances don't define us, that dignity matters more than comfort, that the right kind of stubborn can change everything. Patricia nodded, satisfied. "That's the right answer, not because of what you gained, though that matters, but because of what you proved, to all of us." She gestured toward the city, toward the building full of people whose lives had been touched by this unlikely partnership. Every person in the Second Chance program, every single parent working their way up, every overlooked candidate who got a real shot. They're here because you showed me it was possible. That's worth the hell of those early weeks, don't you think? Raymond did think so. Not every day. There were still moments when the memories of that desperate time made him shudder. But overall, undeniably yes. The job nobody wanted had given him everything that mattered. Stability for Owen, purpose for himself, and the chance to create pathways for others. It had connected him to Patricia, who'd become not quite friend, but something more important. Partner, mentor, the person who'd seen value where everyone else saw risk. Together, they'd proven that the most unlikely partnerships could produce the most meaningful change. As Raymond prepared to leave that night, he paused at the door of Patricia's office, looking back at the woman who'd made his life so difficult and so much better. She was already focused on her computer screen, back to the relentless work that defined her. But she glanced up, caught his gaze, and gave him that slight nod, her highest form of acknowledgement. No words needed. They'd said everything that mattered already, and everything else could wait for tomorrow's challenges. Outside, The city hummed with life. Hundreds of thousands of people pursuing their own desperate dreams, fighting their own impossible battles. Somewhere out there was another Raymond, another person standing in a waiting room, terrified, but determined, wondering if they should take the job nobody wanted. Raymond hoped they would, hoped they'd be stubborn enough to stay, lucky enough to find their own Patricia, brave enough to believe that transformation was possible even when evidence suggested otherwise. Because that was the real lesson of his story, Raymond understood now. Not that taking impossible jobs would automatically lead to success. Plenty of impossible jobs were just impossible, full stop. But that sometimes the doors everyone runs from are running for good reason, except the one time they're not. And you can't know which time is which until you walk through. All you can do is maintain your dignity, hold on to your humanity, and stay standing one day longer than seems reasonable. The job nobody wanted had taught Raymond that lesson, had forced him to discover reserves of strength he hadn't known he possessed, had connected him to opportunities that shouldn't have existed for someone with his background. And in doing so, it had become exactly what the title promised, the best decision of his life. Not because it was easy, not because it was fair, but because it was possible. And sometimes, in a world full of closed doors and rejected applications, possible is the only miracle you need.